Who am I? When I awaken from sleep, is the reality I find myself in real or not? The visual stimuli received by my visual apparatus and processed by my brain, do they provide an accurate image of the world, or merely an approximate representation? What if the world I perceive while awake is a hallucination that unfolds in the moment between sleep and true awakening, collapsing the instant I fully wake up? In today's video, we will discuss how philosophers, mathematicians, and neurobiologists explore how the human brain transforms an unstructured flow of information into our personality and the surrounding world. Many are familiar with the parable of the Chinese philosopher Zhuangzi, who dreamed he was a butterfly. When he awoke, he could not discern. Was he Zhuangzi, who had dreamed he was a butterfly, or a butterfly dreaming it was Zhuangzi? Or perhaps it is even more complex. Is he a butterfly dreaming it is a sleeping Zhuangzi who sees himself as a butterfly? There could be an infinite number of recursions here, but one of the morals of this parable is that reality is not as real as it seems. Behind appearances may lie a true reality, entirely unlike what we are accustomed to. Yet even if the world is a hallucination or a vision, it is undeniable that this dream is experienced by someone and that it is indeed a dream someone is seeing. This is what the philosopher René Descartes taught when he spoke of the certainty of cogito, I think. Why does the perceived reality not disintegrate into pieces, atoms, or discrete elements of perception? Apart from cases of dissociation and derealization, the world remains predictable and cohesive, ordered in the stream of experience that 19th-century psychologists called the stream of consciousness. What accounts for the coherence, orderliness, and predictability of our experience? Where am I? The simplest thing I can say is that I am here and now. Wherever I am, my consciousness is always elusively present with me. I am embedded in the world through it. I cannot look at the world through someone else's eyes. I am not destined to become a butterfly imagining itself as Zhuangzi, just as it cannot become me. Linguistic expressions cannot always accurately convey the essence of this situatedness in the context of here and now, which is why cognitivists prefer to say that consciousness provides a first-person perspective. It is I who see and perceive, I who feel and suffer. My experience is, as it were, concentrated on a single user, controller. But who is this controller, and where did it come from? According to neurophilosopher Thomas Metzinger, this user does not actually exist. The subjective experience of perception, dreams, hallucinations, rational reasoning, and decision-making is tied to an individual perspective solely for the convenience of the brain. Like other hardcore cognitivists, Metzinger likens the brain to a biocomputer with hardware and software. Consciousness, the psychological self, has a certain functionality that predetermines the nature of subjective experiences. Thus, the number and bandwidth of input and output channels for information, visual, auditory, etc., the level of social interactivity, and the ability to be recognized by others as an I determine how subjective experience is lived. The granularity, detail, and plausibility of perceived reality depend on all these characteristics. Why is all this necessary? As Metzinger claims, the coherence and plausibility of experience are tricks employed by our brain to better adapt to reality. We never perceive the world as it truly is, for it is the brain that processes chaotic, unstructured sensory data into a cohesive picture of the world, a representation. The red, sweet apple on the table next to me does not exist. It is the brain that integrates sensory information from various sources, assembling it into a cohesive perceived object, apple. Moreover, the process of creating representations is inaccessible to us. I cannot catch the moment when red, hard, and sweet combine into a ripe apple on the table. Thus, the perceived world is a model of reality created by the brain. In principle, it is no different from a hallucination or a dream. It is virtual in the sense that the brain projects it based on its own computations, governed by the evolutionarily developed efficiency of energy conservation and resource economy. From a physics perspective, all mental activity is a simulation of reality, lagging relative to objectively occurring processes. We never have direct cognitive access to the surrounding world, even when we experience what feels like immediate contact with it. Thus, first-person experience is nothing other than a global, real-time updated model. Interactions between neurons occur instantaneously, so the model updates quickly and produces such a stable and realistic image that we no longer perceive it as a model. For us, it is already an entire world in which we live in all its immediacy and inevitability. What does the inevitability of reality mean? Metzinger explains it with the concept of world zero. The reality I perceive while awake is the default. It is a world beyond which there is nothing for me, a kind of coordinate system, an initial given, not a construct. The fact that objects do not violate the laws of physics and people do not turn out to be zombies or flat images is a sign of the brain's standard functioning, producing a unified, coherent, and globally accessible model of reality. No effort is required to find oneself in reality number zero. We are all in it from the start. So, who am I? In neurophilosophy, it is the brain that constructs an illusory psychological cognitive self, I, to create an interface for interaction between itself and the rest of the organism. In turn, reality is an interface for interaction between I and the world. Experience, according to Metzinger, is an invisible interface, an internal medium that allows the organism to interact with itself. It is a controlling device that functions by creating an internal user interface. Every system requires a certain software environment that would enable it to master its hardware. This software is the model of the organism, and if we extend and reinforce the engineering analogy between consciousness and interface, we can see that both share the characteristic of transparency. What is interface transparency? Simply put, it is a mode of system operation where the user performs relevant tasks directly, without feeling the intrusion of technology into their actions. Similarly, in our subjective experience, we never perceive reality as a virtual model of reality hidden and disguised by our consciousness. We do not even question whether our reality is real, and this is the result of an innate deficit in our ability to recognize that the world is a representation. Moreover, just as the world given to me in perception is virtual, so too is the one who perceives this world. The parable of the dreaming Zhuangzi is radicalized. The dreamer himself is also unreal. Only the brain is real, perpetually in a dream state, never losing its evolutionary vigilance. Metzinger reinterprets the philosophical myth of the cave, where people accustomed to seeing the shadows of things consider the shadows, not the things themselves, to be the true reality. The philosopher is the one who can lead people out of the cave and show them things in the light of day, as they truly are. But Metzinger believes there is no one to lead out of the cave. It is empty, or rather, it is the cave itself that dreams of itself. It is not the cave dweller hypnotized by shadows, but the cave itself, casting those shadows on its surfaces, that hypnotizes, imagining people seeing those shadows. A more modern analogy likens consciousness, subjective perspective, and a total flight simulator. This is a device capable of flying without a pilot and able to build a complex internal image of itself. By creating a virtual model of itself in its environment, it learns maneuvers and complex trajectories of movement. This model is transparent to the simulator. It perceives it as the default. There is no other. The information generated from within the simulator is inaccessible to the system as a whole. The pilot is born within the flight simulator in virtual reality, with no possibility of realizing that it is merely a program created by the coordinated functioning of the entire simulator. Simply put, the pilot is a bot, a humanoid avatar used by the aircraft as an interface for more flexible control over its hardware. According to Metzinger, in addition to real-time online information processing, perception, decision-making, etc., the brain is capable of generating models of possible worlds, that is, offline models. Offline refers to the possibility of cognitive activity without receiving sensory information, relying on the brain's own resources. Spontaneous fantasies and thoughts, inner monologues, daydreams, hallucinations, and dreams are, as it were, superstructures over world zero. Consequently, the experience of wakefulness is an online hallucination. The brain's autonomous activity is modified under the influence of the flow of information from the sensory organs. But what happens if the sensory system's contact with the external world is severed, placing the subject in artificial deprivation? The biocomputer will no longer receive information for real-time online processing. This means that, after some time, its neurophysiological hardware will begin to operate autonomously, offline. Metzinger speaks of philosophical psychonautics, the exploration of dream flights, out-of-body experiences, and other altered states of consciousness. Experiments in sensory deprivation in the 1960s were conducted by scientist and psychonaut John Lilly, a colleague of psychedelic revolution leader Timothy Leary. Having gained fame for studying communication between dolphins and humans, Lilly began exploring the possibilities of human consciousness using chemical substances. He believed that the brain's software could be rewritten or enhanced. Thus, Lilly sought ways to erase, modify, and create programs for this computational device. He distinguished between programming and metaprogramming, where the former corresponded to the brain's ability to learn. Today we would call it synaptic plasticity, and the latter to the ability to learn how to learn. Metaprogramming encompasses the possibility of revising the entire trajectory of cognitive development. To master it, one must work with data and operations that control, modify, and reinstall programs capable of producing standards and protocols for the neurophysiological computer. To initiate the process of brain metaprogramming, Lilly proposed using psychedelics and dissociative drugs. In his view, they act as commands for the brain, revealing its hidden algorithmic structure. Under the influence of these substances, the brain seems to gain access to visual, auditory, tactile, and other sets of variables in the stream of ordered data. It is as if it peers into the code, bypassing the transparent interface of phenomenological consciousness. Simply put, metaprogramming is the discipline of mastering neurochemical computers, initiating processes of self-revelation in the brain. The default reality is undeniable, and beyond it there is nothing, not even the physical reality the brain supposedly interacts with. We cannot peer beyond our experience and assess whether what we perceive aligns with objective reality. Phenomenology also seeks ways to metaprogram consciousness, but through legal highs. It offers techniques that allow one to suspend the habitual flow of thoughts and judgments, redirect attention from external, theoretically laden experience to internal, and thereby become receptive to events in the stream of consciousness. Phenomenology describes any manifestations of cognitive activity at the very moment of their emergence, as in the metaphor of a bootstrapping process, a process that arises, develops, and sustains itself without external influence, relying solely on internal resources. Thus, phenomenology proposes reprogramming the dreaming hardware with the software tools of our consciousness, without invading the code or performing a psychoactive invasion of the brain's chemistry. The results can be no less astonishing, for phenomenology and its branches in cognitive science find the boundaries of hardware to be far broader than those of the brain. Feedback loops weaving together the brain, organic processes, and environmental elements form a system whose limits extend as far as the possibilities of our perception, enhanced by quantum computers and radio telescopes. The possession of a repertoire of cognitive abilities is tied to possessing a specific body with a given set of characteristics and articulations of its constituent parts. Thus, if we had a different body, say 3 or 5 hands or none at all, our interaction with the world would unfold differently, and the familiar graspability of things for a grasping gesture would be replaced by something entirely different. Consequently, the dreaming subject is not the brain, but a distributed system of brain-body environment. What unique things can such a distributed dreaming system perceive? Many of us are familiar with the beautiful fractal patterns that can be seen when taking psychoactive substances or even simply pressing on the eyeballs. These patterns are Turing patterns, ordered structures emerging from chaotic, disordered interactions. They can be found in the regularities of vertebrate limb evolution, in patterns on skin, fur, or feathers, in the principles of embryo formation, and even in prehistoric and ancient art, including petroglyphs, cave paintings, and designs on vases and other objects. These patterns are so widespread in nature and culture that scientists have long wondered, do they reveal something significant about brain physiology and cognitive processes? Only recently have cognitivists and archaeologists, armed with neurobiology and phenomenology, concluded that Turing patterns, visual hallucinations, and symbols of primordial art share common biological processes. In the 1920s, Austrian-American psychologist Heinrich Klüver was the first to systematically study the geometric patterns of visual hallucinations. He identified constant forms arising under the influence of mescaline and categorized them into 4 types. 1. Grids, moldings, honeycombs, chessboards. 2. Cobwebs. 3. Tunnels, funnels, alleys, cones. 4. Spirals. Half a century later, American mathematicians Jack Cowan and Bard Ehrmantraut used Klüver's findings to explain these visual experiences neurophysiologically. Modern mathematician neuroscientist Paul Bresloff links these morphological studies to the discovery of the V1 brain region. This section of the visual cortex is the first to receive visual input information. Brain scans have shown that this region also activates during the production of mental imagery, for example, when a subject imagines or dreams. Other studies have shown that during offline processes of consolidating episodic memory, the primary visual cortex interacts with the hippocampus, resulting in specific visual experiences. Cowan and Ehrmantraut argued that geometric hallucinations arise due to the destabilization of the neural network state in V1. For instance, the influence of a psychedelic triggers chaotic interactions between excitatory and inhibitory neurons, which eventually stabilize into patterns of neural activity. In other words, during offline processes, the brain is capable of autonomous activity independent of external influences and environmental mediation. The psychonaut brain, left to itself, generates images and patterns that have little in common with the patterns and structures it encountered in the familiar reality of World Zero. It turns out that in altered states of consciousness, it redirects to internal experience and generates structures that reprogram perception. The switch between direct sensory motor contact with the environment, which produces the transparent here and now of phenomenological experience, and autonomous hallucinating activity of the central nervous system, this is what allows us to transcend World Zero and construct imagined worlds. Remarkably, switching between standard and altered states of consciousness does not even require drugs. Phenomenology offers reflective techniques that lead to temporary sensory deprivation and offline operation of the nervous system. The disinhibition of the visual cortex during altered states of consciousness, according to scientists, occurs via top-down channels from the prefrontal cortex to V1. This leads to the emergence of Turing patterns of activity that are resistant to visual sensory information. This allowed cognitivist and phenomenologist Tom Froese to hypothesize that imagination evolutionarily arose from the decoupling of the nervous system's autonomous dynamics from external influences. In other words, from sensory deprivation that induces offline brain activity. The brain, finding itself in an introspective state, intensely generates abstract cognitive forms that do not correspond to anything specific from prior experience. Geometric hallucinations arise as if from within the stream of consciousness when the subject's sensory systems are detached from the environment and receive no stimuli from it. The most intriguing aspect here is that in experiencing this inward focus, The subject encounters a visualization of their brain's workings, access to which is blocked in the default mode of World Zero. This suggests a functional connection between changes in states of consciousness in the rituals of ancient cultures and the origin of abstract cognition and symbolic practices. Ancient people were unwitting phenomenologists. They explored the autonomous workings of their brains, marveled at them, and depicted them on cave walls. Thus, the material and symbolic culture of the past captured the experiences of previous generations of people, how they perceived World Zero and what structures they built upon it.